Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. This is Father Jonathan and Luther with The Transfigured Life. Thank you again for tuning in with us. Today, we will be discussing something that seems to, stir some pots, Father. Have you seen some rumblings in the, online world, or even when it comes to the idea of icons? Have you seen things going on like that?
There's two things that really are stumbling blocks to a lot of Protestants and evangelicals coming into the Orthodox Church. Mary is one of them, and the other is icons. So we're talking about one of those two big stumbling blocks tonight, and so everybody's in for a treat.
Right. That is true. That those two are definitely seems to be some of the biggest stumbling blocks for Protestants and for other people maybe looking on the outside who are not Orthodox Christians. So we're going to touch up on that today, and hopefully we can at least open a broad's eye view of it. So basically this issue here, we want to discuss what are these objections to icons? What are the arguments against it? And that's why we blessed to have you, Father, here in this discussion there. But not only just the issues surrounding icons, we want to deal with also what we would probably consider the strongest argument. Not that there really is one, but the new development of how this argumentation has gone. I know that you've probably noticed it as well, Father. It's come from, no images to this is no problem with images. So we're going to talk about that right now. But before we even dive into some of those strong arguments and how we plan to tackle them, it is important for those that are not familiar with this idea of icons and images. It's important that we just talk about just kind of our view of it, Father, and just how we see them as Orthodox Christians. So I wanted to put this in front of you, Father. All right. So here's an icon I got from somewhere in Greece. I think
props. We got props tonight. Yeah,
you see that one? I really like this one. It has this rustic feel to it. I mess with it, and I really like this icon a lot. For some, it really speaks near and dear to me. But Father, so we obviously have respect for the Mother of God, who's beholding the Son of God, right? Like, how would you say we kind of understand these icons? I know for us, we use language like it is windows to heaven. We talk about how these icons, these painted images, we are pretty much, when we show respect and honor to them, we're really not trying to honor wood or paper or whatever, right? We're showing honor to who's represented on the icon. What would you say, Father?
well, that's exactly correct. The Bible speaks of images, and it speaks about both holy images and idolatrous images. So there's two kinds of images spoken about in the Bible. And the holiest of image begins with Jesus Christ. It says that he is the image of the invisible God. We are made in his image and likeness. We are holy images too, especially when the Holy Spirit has come to dwell in us. So there are holy images, and then there are unholy images, and the Lord has commanded us not to make unholy images and set them up as idols. Now, a lot of people in the Protestant evangelical world confuse the word image with the word idol. They don't understand the difference. And there's a lot that's just not possible there to dialogue, because there's so much that has to do with misconceptions of Scripture, but then throw into that, for the Protestant or evangelical, a lack of understanding of history, a lack of knowledge and understanding of the patristic fathers, a lack of knowledge and understanding of what our own mindset as Orthodox is.
Right.
And you have quite a chasm that we sometimes have to jump in order to teach our good friends on the other side of the aisle, so to speak, about what images are and what they are not, and to try and go a long ways to reassure them that these are not idols and we are not worshiping them.
Right, right. And I'm glad you said that, Father, because we would say, right, that these images, you know, a huge reason why they're so important to us, because I have some family members like, oh, what's the big deal? Why do I see these images all over? Meanwhile, they have images of me and other family members all over the house, right? So it's like, it doesn't seem consistent. So it's like when I have, you know, people that I respect highly, you know, who their lives I'm trying to emulate, that's an issue. But you have little old me on your wall, you know what I mean, or whatever the case may be. A huge reason why these icons and images are important to us, Father, and you would say is because of the incarnation, right? Could you speak to that a little bit from the Orthodox perspective? Why the incarnation is inseparable with this idea of images, Christian images specifically?
Sure. And in fact, the part of the answer that I would give is much of the answer that the average Protestant gives against icons. So they go back to the second commandment, they go back to Genesis, and maybe they go to Deuteronomy, where the Lord says, "You will have no graven image of me. You will make no image of me." Of anything in heaven, or you won't make images of anything in heaven or on earth or under the earth. No images of animals, birds, whatever. And the reason for that, as specifically stated in Deuteronomy, which is a retelling of the time on Sinai, is that the Lord says, "Because my form you have not seen."
Right.
And so the other nations, which the Lord said he was going to give to the Israelites as part of their inheritance, these were places that were making images in their own puny mind, understanding what a god was.
Exactly.
And so when we talk about graven images, what we're talking about are people that would cut down trees or get big tablets of stone and carve them into the shape of beings as their mind told them God looked.
Right.
And so then this graven image, this stone, this pillar of wood, whatever it happened to be, didn't represent God. It was God. You know, they were making God in their own image and likeness, you might say.
Right.
And so the Lord said to the Israelites in Sinai, "Don't do that, because you don't know what I look like, and you're not going to be like the other nations, inventing in your puny little mind an image of what you think I look like, and then carrying it through and then taking it through to the logical conclusion, setting it up as a god and then worshiping it. Don't do that. Don't be like the other nations who do that. Don't do that." Now, that's the Old Testament argument. The New Testament argument is much different, because as John's prologue says, as the prologue of the Gospel of St. John, the theologian, that which we have seen, you see, that which we have seen, that which we have heard and touched, and so forth. The incarnation changes everything, because the unknowable, unseeable, God whose form we've never seen, although there were people in the Old Testament who did see it, saw the back of the Lord as he passed through and so forth. And it says Moses spoke to him face to face. So there were these incarnational, we might say these incarnational moments, but setting those aside for now, because that's a much more involved issue to discuss. The second person of the Holy Trinity has taken human form.
Right.
Not as a ghost, not as a phantom, not as I don't know what, but as a real person with real humanity, not fake humanity, not imaginary humanity, not phantasm humanity, real humanity, which he got from his mother. So in the incarnation, the second person of the Holy Trinity took flesh and became human. So because of that, because he did take form, because we did see that form and so forth, we believe now that due to that we can depict the Lord in certain kinds of holy images.
Right.
And his mother and his saints and, you know, everybody else. So,
right. No, that's good. That's good. So earlier, I know we kind of talked a little bit about just how certain people view icons. I want to ask you, how would you say, I know we're in the West, and so that's a lot of our experience here. How would you say our Protestant friends view icons and holy images? Where would you say that we're alike, and where would you say that we kind of depart a little bit? But before you answer that, Father, before you answer that, I know earlier I showed you this icon, right?
Yeah.
And when you show certain people this icon, right, or even an icon of, I don't know, Christ, right? You have, you know, him and, you know, pretty much, you know, rescuing, you know, the folks. Oh, forgive me there. It seems to make some people, I can't speak for everybody, oh, that's not okay. You can't do that, right?
Right.
People start to get a little squeamish. Oh, we shouldn't have images or whatever. But then, Father, and I brought this from a family member, no one bats an eye at this, right? No one tends to get a little squeamish when you pull this out and you start looking at the saints of here and all that, right? And literally, I was at Barnes and Noble the other day, Father, and I seen a whole bunch of stuff looking just like what I'm showing you right now, all in the Christian section. Nobody's burning Barnes and Noble, right? No one's, you know, so I just don't get it. Like, how does that, is that not inconsistent? Like, how does that work?
Well, in their eyes, it would be consistent because they're not bowing down to it. They're not kissing the children's Bible. They're not venerating it and so forth. It's religious art, and it, like holy images, should be respected and so forth. But to them, the difference is we venerate our holy images. They do not venerate, since they don't have holy images to begin with. They do not venerate their holy art. So there's a difference in how they see that, and it's a legitimate difference. You know, it's a legitimate difference. But the fact of the matter is, when we talk about Protestants, we're talking about a huge difference,
right,
in the Protestant Church. You know, we've got, my goodness, you've got
you have some that's very image friendly. I would say there's some that, you know,
there's some that are, Lutherans, Methodists, and so forth. Some the more liturgical churches will be.
Right.
But then you have the entire Reformed tradition and many of the evangelicals that are just screaming about this kind of stuff. But most Protestant scholars of any bent are coming to the point. So we're at a point now, unlike, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago, certainly, you know, more, where most of them have come to the point where they will admit that there are such things as holy images that can be found in the Bible. So they've come to the point where they're ready to admit that. They can't deny, for example, that the temple, and there were 3 temples. Let's say, remember, there was the original tent of meeting, and then there were the 2 later temples, Solomon's temple, and then, you know, Herod's, that had holy images in them. And clearly, those that are willing to be honest will admit that the justification for these holy images is found in Scripture, coming from the mouth of the Lord himself. You will make, he said.
Right.
The Lord said, you will make images of cherubim. You will make images of seraphim. You will make these other images. So if back when the 10 Commandments were given, if the Lord was saying, don't make any images, and now here he is, you know, 7 chapters later, whatever, he's saying to make images, obviously the 2nd commandment has a context.
Right.
And our Protestant evangelical friends that find themselves objecting to icons are clearly misunderstanding what a graven image is. I tried to explain that a little bit earlier. So these were not graven images because although they were reverenced and venerated, they were not worshipped. They were part of the adornment of a holy place. And they were specifically put there so that the beauty of the temple would reflect the beauty of God's creation. And it's also interesting that there are some Protestant scholars, and I'll mention one right now, and for reasons of time and space, we're limiting such citations, but I'll mention Brubaker and Halden, who wrote a book called Byzantium in the Iconoclast Era. On page 62, they say this: the textual and material evidence agree that sacred portraits existed. This is during the New Testament time.
Yes.
So when we talk about holy images, there really is a growing consensus, or at least a growing admission among many scholars that, well, yeah, they kind of existed beginning with the church, but they went through phases. And the veneration of icons didn't happen until the 6th or 7th century or later. So that's where they are. So we've gotten to the point where any image is bad to, well, images did exist, and some of them were considered holy, and some of them were holy, period. And the Christians venerated them, and they even had them in their buildings and things like that. So, but like I said earlier, you know, Protestantism is a very wide swath of churches and beliefs from high to low, from liturgical to non-liturgical. And they are going to look at ancient councils, the canons, patristic teachings through the lens of their own 21st century Protestant experience, just like they do the Bible and all other teachings. They're looking at it not from what did they mean back then, but what does it mean to us today? And let's interpret it here and now, and therefore they come to some of the conclusions that they come to. Now, here's an important point, and then I'm going to throw it back to you, Luther. Some will call icon veneration, and I'm going to use this word because he used the word, an accretion. An accretion. Now, sometimes when we get accused by Protestants of certain things, like, oh, icon veneration is an accretion, and the knee-jerk reaction on some is to go, oh, no, it's not. Well, first of all, I thought that use of the word was very interesting, and it's an interesting word because it does not mean invention or innovation or addition. What the word accretion means is the process of growth or enlargement by a gradual buildup to something that is already there.
Right.
So this is what Protestants trying to disprove us as an apostolic faith do all the time. You find something in an ancient document you don't like, all you have to do is claim it's an accretion. And there's a group of people, I studied them 30 years ago, called the Jesus Seminar. Thank God they really don't exist much anymore. But these were people that were doing just that. And to our listeners, if you know what the Jesus Seminar is, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And they did this back then. If Protestants, listen, if Protestants think accretions are something bad for us, and they've got to look inside their own house, because everything they do is a deviation from the apostolic faith. Everything they do is either an accretion, an addition, innovation, or something that the apostles' faith never had. Right. And it's all a late development, so it's even more than an accretion. Whether it's the solas, whether it's infant baptism, real presence in the Eucharist, the non-veneration and acknowledgement of Mary or the saints. If you're going to say accretions are bad, then what about electric guitars and microphones and laser light shows and fog machines? Where does all that come from? Is that not an accretion of some sort to what worship always has been? Most of Protestants in the Protestant Reformation were against accretions in general in the Roman Catholic Church. So here they are pointing fingers at us saying, oh, this is something you do that's an accretion. And no, it's not. So like I said, you know, there are holy images and there are idols. And icons are holy images. So I think we have to start with that premise.
No, you're speaking too much truth, Father, and one don't do that. Too much truth in 1 second, you know. No, you're spot on. I like what St.John of Damascus actually says in regards to this, because I think sometimes what gets left out in regards to this discussion is like what we talked about in our last episode, this idea of, you know, when St. Paul told us to hold fast to the traditions, whether written or unwritten, right? And also St. John has some words on that. I like what he says. Check this out here, Father. St. John says, the honor rendered to the most faithful of our fellow servants is proof of our love for the common master, and the honor rendered to the image passed over to the original. I'm going to say that again. So he says, the honor rendered to the most faithful of our fellow servants is proof of our love for our common master, and the honor rendered to the image passes over to the original. And then he says, this is an unwritten tradition, as is praying towards the east, venerating the cross, and many other things similar to these. So it seems like St. John of Damascus, pretty much is making this argument that, you look at whether it's prayers to the east, venerating the cross, just because it's not etched out exactly how somebody would like it, right, doesn't mean this was not passed down from the apostles. And, there's the faith of the church is that this is apostolic. This is not some, thing that just popped up and we decided, hey, this is a cool idea. Maybe we should start just kissing pictures and whatever. No, like this is passed down from the apostles. There's this idea that, St. Luke, according to tradition, being the first iconographer, right? The one who wrote the Gospel of Luke, right? Or, you know what I mean? So,
by the way, stop there for a second, because that's an interesting point. A lot of people who hear that poo-poo that, oh, he couldn't possibly have been the first icon painter. What would he have known about painting? Let's remember one thing about physicians back then. They tried to draw a lot of what they learned. They were illustrators, and we know this from stuff that's been found over the years in archaeology and stuff like that. So the idea that St. Luke knew illustration of some kind is a very plausible point that has to be made about him as a physician.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Yeah, and you have other traditions and other stories. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the whole is it King Abgar of Edessa? Yeah. Yeah, so that being another tradition. I actually forget the story on that a little bit, if you could remind me.
Well, a courier came to the Lord and said, my king would like to have something from you. And Jesus took a cloth and pressed his face into it, and his face appeared in an image of his face appeared therefore in the cloth. The cloth was taken back to Edessa, and it was there for hundreds of years. It was seen by people over the gates of the entrance to the city. A lot of people wrote about this. It doesn't survive to our day, but that's what was up there. But so that's the basic story behind what's called the Mandelion, or the icon of the face of Christ.
Right. Good stuff. So we know that there was images early on in the first few centuries of the church, from scholars to, all kinds of people kind of speaking to this reality. We also do know that even in Eusebius, in his church writing, we hear of a statue that was found of the lady with the issue of blood in the Gospel of Luke, I believe, or in the Gospel, pretty much who touched the hem of Christ's garment, who was healed. That she had pretty much a statue in front of her home where many would come and honor and venerate. And this was written about. It's one of the in church history from you have Eusebius.
Well, you know what? I just said something, and you just said something, which we need to mention to our viewers today. A lot of people will say, well, if icons existed and were venerated, why don't we have a lot of them? Why are the only icons that we really have that have survived and are with us to this day? Why are there's so little of that, or why can they only be traced to the 8th or maybe 9th century? Now that's a very legitimate. What's that?
You said that they could be traced to 8th and 9th century in more volume, you'd say.
Well, in other words, in terms of the oldest things we have, the oldest icon we have actually traces back to the mid-6th century. And the only reason it survived all this time is because it was at the monastery of St. Catherine, which during the iconoclast period was under the control of the Muslims. Thank you, Muslims. So the iconoclast couldn't get to it. Now, but here's the point that our friends on the other side of the aisle need to kind of understand. When you talk about, well, why aren't there icons from any period earlier than the 8th or 9th century? Well, my retort will be, well, why aren't there any gospels? Why aren't there any chalices? Why aren't there any vestments? Why isn't there anything that survives from earlier than that period? And a couple of things have to be said about that. Number one, keep in mind that for the first 300 years of the history of the church, there were persecutions. Now, it wasn't one, people kind of think of the age of persecution, it was continual persecution all the time. That's really not true. There would be persecutions and they would stop, and then there would be persecutions again, and then they would stop. So it came in waves. But during those times when the emperor would say, you know, army, go into that church over there and, you know, bring out everything and trample it and burn it and destroy it, that's what they did. So there just isn't much earlier than the time of Constantine, because the empire was destroying everything they could when they were raiding the churches and dragging the people out and all that kind of thing and beheading them and so forth. So there's that we have to deal with. Now, some of the scholars who write these kind of books, I'm talking about heterodox, non-Orthodox scholars, they will admit that there's not much before the time of Constantine, but beginning with Constantine, there's a whole lot of portraiture that starts to develop and things like that. Well, duh. Naturally, there are, because at that point in time, the church was free to do what the church was free to do.
Right.
The church was free to become what she was not free to be, and worship like she was not completely free to worship until that time. And to have art, to have entire churches painted with frescoes and whatnot, and have portraiture icons, you know, done and things like that. You have to have people who know how to do it. You have to have people willing to pay them for it. You have to have money and wealth, and the church up until that time did not have that stuff. So the idea that there wouldn't be a lot prior to Constantine needs to be understood. And even the stuff that then was starting to be produced, a lot of it got destroyed in the 8th century during the iconoclast period. Some people try to make the point that, well, the iconoclasts, they didn't like to be called that. They like to be called icon strugglers. I would use a certain word that begins with bull, but I won't do it publicly. That is nonsense, because the very accounts of that time demonstrate clearly how the iconoclasts were taking icons out and smashing them and burning them and destroying them, doing the same thing the Roman army was doing 400 years earlier. So the idea that struggling for what? Struggling for their own point of view, as long as every icon was destroyed and they were winning, great, you know, let's have at it. But that's not the history of that time. That's not the history of that time. So when people say, well, we don't have many icons earlier than the iconoclast period, again, duh. It's simple and just an easy stretch to go from one point to the other to realize what happened during that time.
Right, right. No, good point. Good point. No, you're on the money there. I do, Father. I want to segue over here and kind of get your thoughts on something that was brewing. So this is pretty much engaging culture. You know, that's something that we try to talk about every episode if possible.
Yeah.
So I noticed that you had a debate on this actual topic, and a lot of people tuned into it. I'm sure it was great entertainment for people, unfortunately. And it was, I'm sure, nerve-wracking in the sense of like pull your hair out, kind of frustrating for you, because you were being like, it's like, what does this guy not understand about this? This is like, well, it's very clear. But with respect to him, I mean, great guy. You guys had a conversation, a good debate on it, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that debate. It was specifically about icons.
Yeah.
Are they holy images or idolatry? And what were your thoughts on that? What do you feel like was being just misunderstood, by this, fine gentleman? And any thoughts on it in general, your perspective?
Well, his problem is the similar problem of many coming from the Reformed tradition.
Right.
And his problem clearly was with the acts of veneration and worship, and of what he perceived to be inanimate objects or idols. Right. Now, our understanding and distinction is crystal clear, and when one cannot even define the word worship, which I asked him to do, I think at least twice, then you know you're having a less than honest exchange and not an open and honest one. Now, I want to make this point to our lovely viewers that when we're glad you tuned in, thank you, and God bless you. I want to make this point to our viewers. The problem with many Protestants and evangelicals is that they think we Orthodox Christians are a stupid, biblically illiterate, and superstitious bunch of people who care nothing for the scriptures and the teachings of our Lord, which are in those scriptures, and who place the fathers above everything else. Now, this is why some Protestants in their anti-Orthodox screeds try to cherry pick the fathers the way they do, thinking that we hold what they say higher than we hold what the Lord says. And clearly, if you have to bring up Constantine and blame him for something as inane as bringing incense and candles into the church, you've already lost the argument. So the thing that we're dealing with is another side, our loyal opposition, that really don't understand us. And they don't understand where we're coming from or what our arguments are really, and things like that. I'm going to read another scholar who wrote about a topic called aniconism. Aniconism. Okay. He wrote a book called Aniconism in the First Centuries of Christianity. And he said this, this scholar, Jensen, said this in his book. Narrative images were never an evident problem, and so were accepted from the beginning. The emergence of saints' portraits in the 4th and early 5th century, which I just discussed a moment ago, posed, according to this guy, new problems. He doesn't say what they are, insofar as these eventually came to be regarded as objects of veneration and widely accepted component of Christian devotional practice. So the point he's making, and he's a proponent of iconoclasm,
right?
The point he's trying to make, he makes that icons have existed from the very beginning. Now, he says, oh, it was a problem once they started making it that they were being venerated. No, that's not a problem. That was the whole point and intent and purpose of creating them. Now, there's something I want to read from another guy named Paul Corby Finney, who suggests that, and this is his quote, the reasons for the non-appearance of Christian art before 200, in other words, we just don't have a lot, left, have nothing to do with a principled aversion to art or otherworldliness or with anti-materialism. The truth is simple and mundane. Christians lacked land and capital. Art requires both. As soon as they begin to acquire land and capital, Christians begin to experiment with their own distinctive forms of art. And as I mentioned, the persecutions and all of that and the iconoclasm period had a lot to do with why we don't have much back from that period. But why we also don't have many manuscripts, why we also don't have a lot of other things that have survived from that time. Most of what has survived from at least Justinian's time onward, and more from the onward than from Justinian. So the whole idea that people have to, the whole objections people have to images really has to do with their misunderstanding them. And I think, quite frankly, to understand what the scriptures say about them, what the early church fathers say about them, and so forth, is to have, for many Protestants, to have to admit that we're right, that our faith does go back to the beginning, and that's what they're deathly afraid of, admitting that there could be something to this orthodoxy thing that does go back to the apostolic times. And if we're right about that, and it goes back to the apostolic times, then what else are we right on, and what else are they wrong on? And I think for some who have a vested interest in their ministry or whatever they call what they do, this is frightening, because it could completely upend who they are and what they represent.
Right. And our approach is, we feel like this is offered to all, right? This is not like, oh, this is our group, this is, and you can't come in, or whatever the case may be. I mean, we want them in, yeah, right. This tradition is offered to us all from as Father Jonathan and myself discussed last time, from the time of the apostles till today. This is the same church, and this is what the church has always fought and believed. Not only in the 7th century, right, or the time of the council, but always, right? We've been always defending the incarnation, because it is essential to Orthodox theology. This idea of the incarnation, that Christ, that the Logos truly put on human flesh, like Father Jonathan just shared, and really became one of us. He was a man like us, fully God, fully man. Obviously unique in many ways, but he was human. He really became a man, and he was able to be seen, as you read in John, I believe in 1 John, right? That they seen him with their eyes, and they were able to hear him and look upon him, touch him. They had a real relationship with Christ, and that's who we honor. And even the saints that have the image of God and that share in his glory, right? And that's something that I think also our friends in the West are missing sometimes, Father, this idea that we share in the glory of God. Like I had a conversation actually with a guy once on Facebook, Father, and he had this post where it's just like, oh, like God's glory alone, or something to that effect. And I get where he's coming from. We say that, like, you probably heard stuff like this. And, it was a public post, and all the people were, yeah, amen, blah, blah, blah. And, not to put them to shame or anything, I just private messaged them like, hey, what do you do with the words of Jesus that say that, in John 17, pretty much that we, the glory that he had from the Father, the beginning, that he would give that to us. Like, we share in his glory. Like we're going to be, united to Christ. That's the hope, at least of the, the Orthodox Christian, that we would grow in grace, that we would become God's by grace. Like we would become by grace what he is by nature. Right. And man, it was so crazy. In short, just the way is just doing hopscotches to like dodge that idea, the way he tried to justify it. And eventually he just stopped writing, but it's crazy. That is a reality for us. God became man, right? And for us, him coming where we are so that we could, by grace, partake in him. So, but Father, I do want to see if you could speak a little bit to this idea of, I know we talked a little bit about veneration and worship, but if you could just kind of press into that a little bit more. If you want to talk about the Greek, the Latin, the differences there, what most people get wrong, and how that could be confusing for some.
For our viewers, again, thank you very much for being here and watching this. One of the thing that people struggle with when they are encountering orthodoxy are the words veneration, worship, reverence. If we bow to something, does that mean we're worshiping it, and so forth? So there's a lot of things that I think have to be clarified. So, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, you're about to get a word study in Greek, because it's necessary to do in order for us to proceed with this question. We do have to talk a little bit about Greek. So let's go and do that. Now, let's deal with the word veneration. Because that is the very word that some Protestants object to when they say, "Oh, you you Orthodox Christians, you venerate icons. That's not right." Okay, all right. So let's talk about what veneration is. Now, let's also remember that we have a problem with translations.
Right.
And the first thing I'll say is that we have to understand that Greek was a very precise language. And when the church fathers at the Seventh Ecumenical Council, which was held in the 8th century, when they used Greek words to delineate how icons can be venerated and so forth, and not worshipped and so forth, they used very specific Greek words. So here's the thing. This word veneration, this comes from a word in Greek called Dulia. Dulia. Now, I've seen with my own eyes, and I've read these translations and so forth. Dulia is sometimes translated as honor. I've seen people do that, which actually gives you an idea. It's not correct, but it actually gives you an idea what translators are thinking when they're trying to translate the word veneration. Veneration, honor, kind of the same thing. We can display veneration in different ways. We can kiss things or people. We can bow to things or people. And that word proskinesis, that word bow, that's a very specific word too, and I'm going to get to it in just a moment. We can cross ourselves in front of an icon. Sometimes we cross ourselves in front of people. We can give offerings of incense and candles. These are all ways in which we can show or demonstrate veneration or honor being given to a person or an icon. A person or an icon. Okay. Now, veneration does not equal worship. Veneration does not equal the Greek word latria. Sometimes pronounced latria, but latria. Latria. Okay. Now, let me go back to what I said a moment ago about veneration. There are different ways to do it: kissing, crossing oneself, offerings, things like that. One of those things is called proskinesis, which means a bow. Now, we will find in the Bible examples in the Old Testament of proskinesis being offered to men, and it's perfectly fine, like to kings, being offered to angels, which sometimes, depending on the context, may be fine or not fine. Depends on the intent, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. And being offered to God. So you can bow before a man, honoring him as man, as a king, a prince, whatever, a prophet. You can bow to him, and it's perfectly all right if your intent is bowing to a man. But if you bow to an angel, as happened many times in the Old and New Testament, someone bowed down to an angel, and the angel said, "Get up! I'm not like, I'm just an angel. I'm not God." That's because the person bowing to the angel was bowing to the angel with the thought, with the intent of giving to that angel the same kind of veneration that could be given to God. And it's over that confusion that the angel corrected the person bowing to them. I hope all my viewers, I hope I've kept you so far. Now, you can have proskinesis, bowing, which is appropriate to an icon, because you're just venerating the person represented in the icon. You can have proskinesis that's offered in worship, where, as many of our viewers might know, going to certain Orthodox services, especially during Lent, you do a lot of bowing. And you do a lot of bowing at different stages. You can bow from your waist. You can bow from your head. Okay, so you bow from your head, bow from your waist. You can make a bow and touch the floor. You can get all the way down on your knees and touch your head to the floor, like many people see Muslims do. Well, that they got it from us. That's what we've been doing in the Orthodox Church for 2,000 years.
You're welcome.
So this idea, yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. By the way, coverings and prayer rugs, same thing. They got that from us.
They got that from the Orthodox Christians.
So proskinesis is a solemn gesture. And this is the very gesture, this bowing before icons and kissing them. These are the very gestures that many Protestants question because they don't understand what's taking place. They see someone bowing to, this picture, and they think it's inappropriate because shouldn't you be giving that reverence to God? Well, we can give that reverence to God, and we do. But the reverence we're giving to the person depicted in that icon is reverence to that person in the icon. It's not to the paint and the wood or the print or whatever it is. We're not honoring it. We're honoring the person that's depicted in the icon. Just as we would offer proskinesis, bowing, a reverent gesture of bowing to God, we can offer a reverent gesture of bowing to a saint in an icon.
And that was an Eastern custom as well, Father, right?
It's an ancient custom that goes back thousands and thousands of years. Right. So we did not invent it.
Even though it's awkward for some people here in the West, this was a sign of humility. This was normal. You hear what I'm saying? Like you would.
Yeah. Now, by the way, I think that's another, this needs to be discussed. It needs to be discussed. I think that's another problem with many people who, as Americans, take righteous glory in the idea that an American bows to no one.
Right.
And this even goes back to the 1900 or the 1904 Olympics that were in London. You know how when the Olympic teams come in, especially in a country where there's a monarch, but even in other countries where the head of state is a president, every country will take their flag and they will dip it in front of that monarch or president as a sign of respect. The United States does not do that and hasn't done it since the first Olympic Games. Because why? That the guy who carried the flag back then said, "We bow to no earthly king." So I think that one of the problems is that you have in American society this idea that you don't humble yourself in front of another person. You don't get down on your knees in front of another person, whether that person is human or divine. You just don't do that. That's not a gesture. That's not an expression. That is an American way of showing our reverence or veneration or whatever. We don't bow. It's not done really in American culture.
Right.
Not really, you know.
Right.
So that's part of the problem, was when people see us bowing, let alone kissing. We're you know, people are strange about that in America. We don't kiss strangers. You know, you do in an Orthodox church, that's for sure. And you know, European culture does it, but all one has to do is go to Asia, and the bow and the degree of the bow,
right,
is very indicative of your state of you know, referencing between you and that other person. In other words, deep bows are very are considered, for example, very apologetic and repentful and things like that. So cultures have had this for thousands of years, but we don't do it in America. So the idea that we would make certain gestures here in America that are not normally made in polite society is seen by many people as being offensive, and I'm not doing that, and neither should you.
Right, right. Yeah. No, that's so true, Father. Is it funny hearing you say that? I have a mommy in the church. She's back in Eastern Europe now, but she used to do the 3 kisses. You know, I always remember that, you know, 3 kisses on the cheek, which is, you know, normal in that culture. And even I spent some time in Zambia, Africa for about a month, and it was normal for people to bow, you know, bow towards one another. It was not something that was taboo, even though it was different from us Americans that were there visiting. And so you're definitely on the money. On that thought, Father, I wanted to just make this final point. So we mentioned that, you know, there's this argument that, oh, you know, the argument has shifted over time, right? It's no longer, hey, you know, okay, we grant it. Okay, there was images in the early church. There was images in the first few centuries. All right, we're no longer making that argument towards the Orthodox anymore. Then you have the new development of argument. Well, oh, you know, this accretion thing, which you dealt with right now and explained, you know, pretty much the Orthodox view on that, and how that's, you know, that's not the case, right? Then not only that, we also have to take into consideration this idea that, you know, the Oriental Orthodox, I think this doesn't get talked about enough, Father, right? We separated with them, what, was it the 4th century, 5th century?
It was complete. It was complete in the mid-6th century.
Okay, so complete in the mid-6th century, we separated with the Oriental Orthodox, you know, and so they also venerate images, you know, and I've never heard a coherent answer to this, an answer that makes sense from the opposing side that's trying to attack, you know, icon veneration. If we separated from them so early on, right, and they venerate images in every apostolic church, right? You have the Orthodox, you know, you have the Oriental Orthodox, you know, you have the, you know, Roman Catholic Church, who obviously we have, you know, our disagreements with them. Hopefully, we all unite one day, you know, under the Orthodox Church. But you have all these apostolic churches that could link back to the beginning, as far as apostolic succession is concerned. We all venerate images, and it's all the new kids on the block that mainly have the issues with them. So how is it, right, that our Oriental Orthodox brothers venerate icons, yet we were separated so long ago from them? You know, I feel like in a way that's not obviously the defeater to the whole discussion, but definitely has a huge stake in this conversation, because we were separated so long ago. So that at least accounts for a couple centuries where this was a practice. And that's not like at the point when we separated, okay, now let's all venerate icons. That means it's probably been going on for some time now. So I just thought that was something that was interesting that I never really heard a good argument for.
And you won't.
So, Father, as we close, Father, I wanted to just say thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for the audience that tuned in. Father, any final departing thoughts?
Yes, you will hear Protestants of the Reformed tradition, because they're really the only ones bringing these arguments up. You will hear Protestants of the Reformed tradition say, oh, the church fathers spoke against it. Nonsense. No, they didn't. And if we had more time, I would go back to saints of the 3rd and 4th century and read you what they wrote about icons and venerating them and so forth. The practice has been there since the beginning. The veneration has been there since the beginning. And the fact that you've got Protestant scholars saying otherwise clearly reveals their bias when you've got other scholars who are saying the exact opposite and the fathers of the church saying the exact opposite. So let not your heart be troubled. This is something that is a beautiful expression of the Incarnation and of our faith in Jesus Christ. And the devotion that people have to icons is not a devotion to an icon. It's a devotion to the person of that icon, whether it be our Lord, whether it be Our Lady, whether it be saints of some kind. The devotion reveals the incredible and extensive communion of saints that surround us, of which we are a part, and revealing their love and their care for us through Jesus Christ.
Well said. Well said. Thank you. Thank you. Well, guys, thank you again for tuning in with Father Jonathan and myself. I do want to say, feel free if you have any comments in regards to this discussion on icon veneration. What are your thoughts? So do you think that maybe there's some fathers, I know St. Basil has some comments on this topic as well. Feel free to leave it in the comment section. And also for Protestants or anybody else, whether Muslim or whoever, if you feel like, hey, well, here's why, I appreciate what you guys shared, but here's my issue with icons. Feel free to share it in the comments. We'd love to engage it and see where we go from there.
That sounds good.
All right. All right. Well, thanks, guys, again. And subscribe to this YouTube channel, like, comment, do all that good stuff. And we will be back again. We got some guests coming up in the future. So you don't want to miss out. So we'll see you soon.
Don't tell them who it is yet.
Okay. We'll keep that in-house. You guys take care.